On 7 December 1941, the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii was attacked by the Imperial Japanese Navy. The U.S. military was surprised by this fierce attack and was incapable of mounting a swift response. On board the USS West Virginia BB-48, a battleship moored at Pearl Harbor, was Mess Attendant Second Class Doris Miller. He was caught between the exploding bombs and the attacking aircraft, but decided to fight back and manned an anti-aircraft machine gun. In doing so, he became the first Black American hero of the Second World War. During the First World War, Black Americans served as mess attendants, coal passers, or firemen on board of ships of the United States Navy. They could even rise to the rank of petty officers. This changed after the First World War. By 1919, it became impossible for Black Americans to serve in the Navy at all. The only Black people still in service were those who had already been in service and were allowed to stay until retirement. It was only in December 1932 that the Navy opened service for Black Americans again. However, they were only allowed to serve in the steward's branch. Thus, the Black sailors could only serve food, take care of laundry, or perform similar duties, but weren't allowed to handle weapons. In June 1940, 4,007 Black Americans were serving in the U.S. Navy. One of those mess attendants was Doris Miller, who was born on 12 October 1919 in Waco, Texas, and had enlisted in the U.S. Navy on 16 September 1939. He started as a mess attendant third class, before rising to the rank of mess attendant second class on 16 February 1941. On 7 December 1941, a day which President Roosevelt referred to as a day of infamy,
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii was attacked by more than 353 Japanese aircraft. The attack was an Imperial Japanese victory. It had come as a total surprise and inflicted severe casualties on the U.S. Navy. 3 U.S. Navy ships were lost, including the battleships USS Arizona and USS Oklahoma. 6 other battleships suffered various degrees of damage. 3 cruisers and 3 destroyers were damaged. 169 U.S. aircraft were destroyed and 159 were damaged. 2,403 people were killed, including 68 civilians, while the Japanese suffered the loss of 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines. 129 soldiers were killed and 1 taken prisoner. On board the USS West Virginia, Doris Miller was busy with his work when suddenly the battle station's alarm sounded. Miller went to his position, but it had been destroyed, and he reported to Times Square on deck, a central area. There, he was ordered to help with evacuating the wounded to places of more safety. Miller also assisted the ship's captain, Mervyn Benyon, who had been wounded earlier. Benyon would be moved to a safer spot and from there continue to give instructions to his crew to fight and defend the ship. Benyon eventually passed away from blood loss. Lieutenant Frederick H. White ordered Miller to help him and Ensign Victor Delano with manning 250 caliber anti-aircraft machine guns. Although Miller had not been trained for this gun, he was quickly explained how to operate. The 2 men expected Miller to feed ammunitions to the guns, but unlike what they expected, Miller started firing one of them, and White continued to load ammunition. When asked about his actions, Miller later stated, "It wasn't hard, I just pulled the trigger and she worked fine. I watched the others with these guns. I guess I fired her for about 15 minutes. I think I got one of those jet planes. They were driving pretty close to us." The men continued to fight until they were forced away due to the ravaging fire. Miller then assisted in evacuating wounded sailors, thereby saving lives that would otherwise have been lost. The ship had been heavily damaged by torpedoes, bombs, and the resulting damages. However, the ship didn't capsize due to the counter-flooded compartments. Instead, the ship sank to the bottom of the shallow harbor and was eventually restored to duty. 132 people were killed, while 52 were wounded. Despite Miller's heroic actions, he was not immediately recognized for his bravery. When a list of commendations for 7 December 1941 was published on 1 January 1942, it included only a reference to the Black hero. Meanwhile, Captain Mervyn Benyon, who had died on the USS West Virginia, had been posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. It took several months before Miller's identity was revealed, and the Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, was not eager to award Miller for his actions. Pressure from the Black press was again needed before Miller's actions were publicly recognized. His name was covered in the press, and on 27 May 1942, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, awarded Miller with the Navy Cross on board of the aircraft carrier Enterprise. On 1 June 1942, Miller was promoted to Mess Attendant First Class, on the same day as when general service in the Navy was open for Black Americans. Unlike white soldiers who were recalled for war bond drives, Miller continued to serve, and the black press became involved once more until Miller reported ashore for a war bond drive. He would speak about his actions and attend ceremonies. He was even featured on recruitment posters. On 15 May 1943, Miller reported to the escort carrier Liscome Bay, CVE 56. This escort carrier left Hawaii on 10 November 1943, headed towards the Makin Atoll at the Gilbert Islands. On 22 November, during the Battle of Makin, the USS Liscome Bay was struck by a torpedo fired by Japanese submarine I-175. As written by Robert L. Schwartz, who wrote Tragedy of the Liscome Bay. The submarine attack was a complete surprise. It was the Liscome Bay's third day of the invasion, and her crew had lost her tenseness that goes with the beginning of a long operation. Only their standard occupational alertness remained. The scuttlebutt reported that the nearest enemy ships were 2 days away. The torpedo struck a half hour before dawn, and it was still dark when the Liscome Bay sank. General quarters had sounded at 0505, in keeping with the strict custom of sending men to their battle stations at dawn and at dusk in combat zones. 5 minutes later, a voice shouted, "Christ, here comes a torpedo!" It struck near the stern of the port side. The whole after section broke quickly in flames, and most of the crew stationed there died instantly. The Liscome Bay was the only ship sunk during the operation. Out of more than 900 people who served on board the Liscome Bay, just 272 were saved. Doris Miller was one of the casualties, and his body was never recovered. On 25 November 1944, Doris Miller was officially declared dead. He was just 24 years old when he died. Doris Miller was and continues to be a symbol for Americans of all races, both in and out of the military. He's featured in films such as the 1970 film Tora 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 and in the Michael Bay movie Pearl Harbor, which came out in 2001. He's featured on a postage stamp, which came out in 2010, and several schools and community centers are named after him. His legacy also lives on in several ships in the U.S. Navy. The USS Miller FF-1091, a Knox-class frigate, was named after him. The ship was commissioned on 30 June 1973 and decommissioned on 15 October 1991. The USS Doris Miller CVN-81, a future Gerald R. Ford class aircraft carrier, is likewise named in his honor. The ship is expected to be commissioned in 2032. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Hit the bell icon to be notified of our next video.